Want to know the difference between React and React Native? Let's find out. So, before that, let me give you a quick introduction on React. So, React.js. It is one of the biggest, most popular library of today that's used for building a beautiful front end without having to put much effort. So, you can build all of the user interface components and render them very easily in a powerful way. So, when we think about React.js, it was actually developed by Facebook in 2011, and it was created to solve one particular issue with creating a good user interface which was not only high performing but at the end of the day very efficient in terms of loading, in terms of being able to reproduce a lot of animated 3D content. So now let us say you go to a website and click somewhere on the website and the website reloads. So do you think the whole website gets reloaded? So the answer is no. Only the component where the update has happened gets refreshed. This is possible due to a concept called dynamic rendering. And you know what? React.js was developed in 2011, but they actually open sourced it and made it free for all in the year 2013. The next thing comes is virtual DOM. So this React uses DOM. Well, it's a sort of an agreement that goes on in between the data inputs and the data outputs and certain methodologies and implementation. So, you know if your input is the way it is and what happens after rendering and how the output is shown, and all of that defines the bridge in between these is the simplest way. So now let us dive into the comparison between React versus React Native. And the first point we'll check out is the platform. So I'm sure when we are talking about the platform, React is already a framework that's used to build applications and it makes use of JavaScript. So yeah, so while React Native is an entire platform on its own with native APIs, with components, and all. So you can build native components mobile applications which are cross platform. So the next point we have to check out is the learning curve, because this is something we get asked a lot when we are talking about React or React Native, like which is easier to learn. So well, let me tell you, React.js is the most used JavaScript library. In this case, if there is a requirement to build a very high performing user interface, this is done. What about React Native? I mean, in terms of learnability. So, well, React Native already has all of the React components. So, if you learn React Native, you will bring about everything there is to know about React.js and more. So, learning either one of them should help you depending on what you want to do. If you're inclined towards JavaScript and its usage, React.js will be very nice and very simple to start with. So if you want the challenge of moving towards native development or native programming, then React Native is going to give you this wonderful platform where you can put the exact time and effort, and you will understand the value of your time and the efforts, because at the end of the day you are that much efficient at doing whatever React.js can do and in a very better way. So, coming to the next point in this React versus React Native comparison, we have to talk about rendering. So, now let's see with rendering what happens is that whatever browser code we have in React, it means it gets rendered to a virtual DOM, as I mentioned in the previous slide. But with React Native, the answer is no. React Native does not use virtual DOM, but what it uses is the presence of native APIs that is very vital, that is very foundational, and which has a very important aspect of rendering all these components and all the reusable components, you know. So, rendering all these reusable components on a platform. So React.js uses virtual DOM and React uses native APIs. Now, if you're talking about the syntax again, this could be complementary to our second point, which is easier to learn. So, well, with syntax, React makes use of HTML and the syntax flow which goes on and complements to HTML as well. So, is this exactly HTML? No, it's all JavaScript. You already know this. But what about React Native? React Native makes use of its native syntax. Okay, now we all are thinking, what is native syntax? The syntax itself is called as native syntax. It's not very much, like, it's not very different when we compare it with actual React.js syntax. But it has its own kinks. So to start out with React.js, it will be very nice, very elegant to start with. So, in case you're inclined towards JavaScript, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned, if you want to develop an app which caters both to iOS, Apple audience, and the Android user base, then of course, React Native is going to be a wonderful tool to get started with. So now, whenever we talk about front-end development, mobile app development, there is something which takes center edge in terms of styling. It is nothing but cascading style sheets, or just we call it as CSS. So, what about React and React Native with CSS? One thing is that React will work amazingly well whenever you have to make use of CSS. Let's say for animations or for styling or to move around GIFs and all. Anything that has to do with styling, React will do it well. So now what happens with React Native again? So React Native again has a standalone APIs. Uh, they are called as animated APIs, where we can animate any of the components that has to be rendered on the screen by making use of very simple code. I mean, in terms of making use of correct CSS and all. And React Native does not have to make use of CSS because it has its own API called as animated API, which we use to work with. So, is there a winner in this point? The answer is very difficult for this because CSS is again another amazing entity to work with on its own. But then the efficiency that React Native provides, I mean, the API is very easy and very elegant to use. So it does not take much efforts to work with to get beautiful looking results and beautiful looking front ends for your applications as well. So in that aspect, each one has its own pros and each one has its own cons. So with this, I'm sure you will have a question saying, which should I pick? So the answer is not that simple, but then you can make up your mind. Like, see, with React, what it does is it is one of these frameworks which is rapidly growing in popularity ever since its launch. And it has a complete capability to build a good responsive user interface which is dynamic, which is high performing for any sort of web application that you require. This, at the end of the day, is hugely advantageous for you as a learner because, again, you know, both React and React Native will help you launch your career in terms of application, and like there are some points. So, one, because of its popularity, two, because of its amazing tool we use, number three, because the world is looking for React developers and React Native developers constantly. So you can use this as an aspect to take a side as well. So now with React Native, what actually happens is that it will give you a simpler and straightforward, elegant working methodology with the native core that we are working with. So whenever you are developing a mobile application, it feels native. So these are the differences between React and React Native.